again. Shabbat Sholom. I've spent not less than 2 or 3 days trying to figure out how to link Parashat Vayera with Veterans Day. And, it was right there the entire time at opening verses of the Torah portion. It was easier than I ever thought. So the opening scene of Vayera has Abraham being visited by God after performing his own circumcision. And mind you, he was 100 years old. So this was a little bit painful. And so the tradition tells us that God visits Abraham as an act of visiting the sick, Bikur Cholim. And while Abraham's engaged with the visit of God, he lifts up his head and he sees 3 men walking towards him. This is the setting. And instead of continuing the conversation with God, he leaves whatever he's doing and he jumps up and he goes and greets the 3 angels. So this is what it's all about. To leave everything you are doing, even if you are talking with God, to go and serve others and make their lives easier. And that is the connection. Abraham not even for a second thinks about not getting up. And he goes and provides food and shelter and shade and water to these travelers. And without him, they may have not even completed the journey. So this week during Veterans Day, and by the way, we're one of the only countries in the world, perhaps the only one, that has a separate day to commemorate Veterans Day and Memorial Day. And there's a whole story of how that came about. Memorial Day originally was a commemoration for those fallen during the Civil War. And Veterans Day became the day when we commemorated and remembered those who served in the world wars and subsequent wars. So, what does it mean to serve your country? It really means to leave everything behind, everything you care for, to go and fight for the greater good of humanity. And I know that it sounds like a cliche and that, of course, that's what's expected of me to say, but nothing is truer than that. You see, Judaism doesn't describe freedom as the ability to do whatever you want. Judaism doesn't describe freedom as the ability to just walk wherever you want or say whatever you want to say. Judaism describes freedom as doing what Abraham does, leaving whatever you're doing and helping others so that they can be free. Veterans Day has never been more important to us as American Jews. God knows the countless, thousands upon thousands of Jewish men and women who had given their lives for our country. Never before in history have we lived in a place where, as a matter of fact, we feel like equals, where we fight like equals. We've never lived in a place, certainly before the establishment of the State of Israel, where there's so much at stake for us, because we are part of the fabric of this country. We're weaved in by now. And so we fight for freedom and justice and the pursuit of happiness. Not because that's what we want to achieve, but because we are an integral part of that. Our tradition says, "Gdolav nasat orchim me'akavalat pnei hashchina." Hospitality to strangers is greater than welcoming the divine presence. And the reason why we have that midrash is because Abraham leaves the presence of God to go and help others. Nothing was more important than helping others. And that symbolizes freedom through duty. There's nothing else like that. And then remember what he does when he stands in front of God, as he advocates for Sodom and Gomorrah. Ashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat chalila lecha. Far be it from you. Look at the way Abraham's talking to God. Will the ruler and the judge of all earth not act justly? This is incredible. The chutzpah, right? So it means that nothing stands in the way of your pursuit of freedom and fighting for others, even when God is standing in your way. And we follow this example throughout time, religiously, because it's a mitzvah. And then, of course, the Akedah comes to remind us in this same Torah portion that nothing, no great sacrifice comes without pain. And if you picture the moments when Abraham is about to take the knife and pierce his son in the heart, what does the tradition say happened? Dma'ot noshrot meinav shel Abraham benoflot beinav shel Yitzchak. Tears come out of the eyes of Abraham and they fall in the eyes of Isaac. And according to the rabbis, that's how Isaac becomes almost blind. The pain of his father, following the call to free the world, to fight for others, actually gave Isaac his own severe dose of pain. Sometimes it means that you do for others what you don't do for yourself or for your own family. You sacrifice in a way that is almost impossible to understand. I want to tell you a story, and by the way, I've shared this, I think, once before, but it's an important story. And you always ask me if I make up the stories, and the answer is no. I don't make them up. This is a real story. It happened during the first time I went on the March of the Living with the kids from our congregation. When we entered Auschwitz, we saw a group of high-ranking military officers from many armies in the world, including the Israeli army. And there was an American officer standing there in full regalia. And in my eyes, he just looked like an absolute hero. He was doing nothing. He was just standing at Auschwitz. And somehow I went up to him, and he looked at me, and I was in awe of this man. And he hugged me. And my friend Ty Perry, who's an evangelical pastor, was standing next to me. He will not let me lie. He said to me, "Are you an American?" I said, "Yeah, I just became an American a couple of years ago. And I'm so proud of seeing you standing here." And he looks at me and says, "Do not worry. As long as we are here, this will never happen again." That to me meant the entire world. I knew what I always known before, but even in a better way, that the decision to become a citizen of this country, to be a part of this country, is one of the best decisions I've made in my entire life. Because never again will I have to question whether I'm wanted or not, whether I will have to leave or not. I finally am part of a country that will fight for my right to be who I am. Let me share with you 3 quick stories. And by the way, I must tell you, every time after Shabbat I go home and Lee says to me, "You know, your sermon was okay, but it was too long." So sorry, Lee, you're going to hate me today because I have to tell the stories. And I'm going to get home and she's going to give it to me. Sorry, guys, I just have to. Maybe this will protect me a little bit. Here's the first story. Tibor Rubin. He was born in Hungary, survivor of Mauthausen. Came to the United States as a young man, enlisted in the army, fought in the Korean War, was picked up by the North Koreans, was taken to POW camp. And for the entire war, Tibor scrapped whatever food he can and collected food to keep those around him who were too sick to survive alive. This is a skill he learned in Mauthausen. And he was now using it in North Korea. And when he finally got out, and now in 2005 they gave him the Medal of Honor, you know what he said? "I wanted to show my gratitude to this country that saved my life. So I wanted to save as many Americans as I could." Sidney Shachnow, a Lithuanian young boy who escaped also a concentration camp, came to the United States, enlisted. He rose to Major General, fought in the Vietnam War. And he said, I owe this country my life and my soul and my spirit. People like him lived on to remind us that freedom costs the eternal vigilance, even with our own lives. And here's my favorite story, Edward Chames. I don't know if you know this name, but he is the last surviving member of the Band of Brothers. Those people who parachuted over Normandy, behind enemy lines on D-Day. And he's famous because as he was leaving the plane and with all that noise, the man standing next to him heard him recite Shema Israel before jumping out of the plane. And he survived. And he went on to recite the Shema every night for the rest of his life. And his sacrifice so that you and I could be here this morning is something that we should not take for granted. Now, like Abraham, each one of these men lifted his eyes, left the presence of whatever was important to them, and went to serve the greater good of the world. And honestly, at this point, Dayenu, I could finish my sermon right here. We could just call it a day and go to the Kiddush in a couple of minutes, but I'm not going to do that. Because I want to share with you another story. Another veteran, one of our own. A young man from Plainview, Long Island, who grew up in the Schechter Day School, in Camp Ramah, in USY. He could have been your child or mine, easily. His name was Omer Nutra. Omer's body was returned to us by those murderous beasts of Hamas last week. And he was laid to rest in Tel Aviv. As many as you know, Omer died on October 7th, fighting for his country, fighting for his people. He was a tank commander. Thousands gathered for his funeral in Tel Aviv. And among the people who attended, here's the surprise, and let me tell you how I found out about it. So I have a friend of mine, Rabbi Jacob Herber, who's in Norfolk, Virginia, who, when we went to rabbinical school, and Jacob's probably about 10 years older than me. I hope he listens to this sermon and realizes how old he is. We used to call him the king of useless information. Never play trivia with him. You'll lose for sure. He finally sent me a piece of information I could use in a sermon. He, by the way, is a chaplain in the Coast Guard. And this is what happened at Omer Nutra's funeral. Admiral Bradley Cooper, the commander of CENTCOM, gave one of the eulogies for Omer. Now, just for you to understand, it's not the norm for an Israeli soldier to have a decorated United States Navy admiral speak at his funeral. Certainly not the commander of Central Command. Admiral Cooper is 58 years old. He's a career naval officer. He has served in every theater the United States has seen since he was of military age to serve. And these are his words. I'm going to just paraphrase a little. It's important that we listen to what he said. As a commander, as a father, I stand by you with a heavy heart. Each of us who has worn a uniform understands service with the possibility of sacrifice. Omer paid the ultimate price. He is the son of two nations, a hero of two nations. During the Hamas attack, he ran toward the fire and led from the front and protected others. A Long Island native raised in Plainville, New York, he was part of America's promise and Israel's defense. In his parents' words, Omer was a great kid. He loved sport. He was a natural leader, the captain of his sports teams. When his peers went off to college, Omer chose a different path. He chose to be a warrior, and then Admiral Cooper says in Hebrew, a lochem. He deferred his studies to serve in the IDF, believing that duty to one's people transcends border and comfort. Instead of going back to the United States, he once again chose service. This time he became an officer, an armor officer. He did not have to do it. On October 6th, he spoke to his parents, telling them he was guarding the border and that he and his men expected it to be quiet, but that they were ready. That was the last conversation of Omer with his parents. On the morning of October 7th, Omer took it upon himself to do what very few of us do in our lives, and only the most courageous do. With little or no direction, he ran towards the sound of gunfire. He could have rested, turned away, hid, done nothing. But that is not who a hero is. He did what he had always done. He led from the front and protected his people. Kol haomer ein li ela atzmi, ein lo gam et atzmo. The Talmud says, whoever says, I only have myself, doesn't even have only himself. Freedom, dear friends, endures only when we see beyond ourselves, when we fight for justice, when we protect the vulnerable, and when we honor, like today we're doing, we honor those who have paid the ultimate price. One of my favorite statements in the Bible says, Lo b'chayil ve'lo b'koach, ela beruchi. Not by might and not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. But there are times that chayil, spirit, is not enough. There are times when we have to defend ourselves. And I promised myself I was not going to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I know better. I hope that all of you young people who are here today, and all of us my age, we understand that freedom is something worth fighting for. So here it goes. Last week there was a video on social media that almost made me lose my cool. It was a video of a couple of rabbis in New York City saying to each other, hello, Rabbi, hello, Rabbi, hello, Rabbi. We're voting for Zohar Mamdani. And pardon me, but I almost vomited. Because it trivializes not only who we are, but my calling, what I do for a living, the meaning that I try to bring to people's lives. That's very personal to me. And one of those hello rabbis is a transgender rabbi that should know better and should look at history and what Mamdani's globalized intifada followers do to people like her. So you want to talk about being tone deaf to history? This is what it means to be tone deaf to history and to your peoplehood. Let me just end with a phrase from the Tanakh that we as Jews should know. And if you don't know it, shame on you. Ech naflu giborim. How have the mighty fallen? That says it all. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Jewish tradition, I'll bring something from the British literary tradition of the 19th century. This is how I feel today. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was an age of wisdom. It was an age of foolishness. Shabbat Shalom. Let us please rise. We're going to continue with Chatzi Kaddish on page 180.